we'll figure it out as we go afterwards.
Yeah, we'll figure it out as we go. That'd be lovely. Thank you. So it's my great delight for everybody on the call to introduce Nick. Some of you, I'm sure, will know him from the Reconditioning Games, but I'll let Nick introduce himself. And he's going to help us get our QI skills up and going as we continue our reconditioning rehabilitation journey. Thank you, Nick. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeannie. Yes, most of you probably recognise, or some of you might recognise my name at least anyway from spamming inboxes that I do regularly or have regularly over the last 12 months with reconditioning activity. So been really proud to be able to lead that. But my day job is more around improvement and improvement approaches, and this is what I'm passionate about. So when the ask came out, I not very humbly put my hand up and said, I'd love to do that. Come and talk to you guys about quality improvement and different approaches. And I'm going to take a slightly different tack, if that's okay, because I think one of the things I'm always mindful of is that can you see the screen, by the way? Can you see the shared screen? Yeah, thank you. I'm always mindful that we often share lots of tools and techniques, but I'm a lot more focused a lot of the time on how do we create the environment? How do we create we talk about culture a lot, and that's an overused word, but I just talk about how do we create the foundations and the groundwork for improvement? And that's what I'm going to talk a bit more about today, if that's okay. Ask lots of questions in the chat if you want to. I'll happily pick those up afterwards, or just comment in the chat. If you think I'm talking rubbish, then please do let me know. I'm more than happy to be challenged. These are my thoughts gathered over 20 odd years of improvement work in the health service, and I've definitely been on that journey from being the absolute tool head to somebody who thinks a bit more. It's not about the tools, it's about how we apply some of those tools. So as I said, this is me, an improvement advisor as a day job with the emergency care improvement support team, and around about this time last year, we kind of made those first early steps in creating the reconditioning games and talked about what that would. And I've been extremely proud, and still am so proud to be able to lead that from a national perspective and see all the work that's carrying on. So this is where I'm coming from in terms of improvement as an approach, and I want to try and share with you some thoughts about how we take improvement forward, whether we talk about QI or quality improvement or improvement in general. I want you to all start thinking more as farmers and how we create the environment, how we create the soil, how we prepare the soil for the great ideas that you all produce and then take forward. Because we know what happens when what we try and do is introduce our improvement ideas or different ways of working into a barren landscape. We haven't done any preparation. We've just tried to plant this brilliant idea we've got. Any of you who are gardeners, we know if we don't fertilize the soil first, if we don't prepare the soil first, water it a little bit, give it a bit of love, bit of encouragement, those really expensive, beautiful roses that we've just spent 30 or 40 pound on are probably just going to die and wilt away. So I wanted to touch on the initial thoughts around QI, quality improvement. It is banded around a bit, and I do like to have the opportunity to share some thinking around this and sometimes throw a bit of a challenge back to the often the overused tools approach. Tools are great, as I said, and there are lots of tools, lots of models. But as George Box says, essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. And sometimes we can find some use in some of the tools, but it shouldn't be just a blanket. We just pull the tools off the shelf. So when we talk about QI, it's become typically in the NHS, we like to create things about things, but I wanted to just share with you where QI comes from. And it sits amongst a suite of approaches that was first developed by Joseph Duran back in the 80s. In his quality trilogy he talks about. And the thing to remember here when we talk about QI, quality improvement, the word quality is the important factor. Quality improvement is just a way of improving quality, but it sometimes gets banded around like it's a thing in itself. So I encourage people to swap the words around, talk about improving quality rather than quality improvement. And that just comes about from a series of activities where you plan for that quality. You think that, right, we need to do something about this level of quality we currently have, whether that's good or indifferent. We then aim to maintain that quality, and that's often done through a series of audits or inspection, and we'll maintain a level of quality, and we'll understand what the level of quality currently is. But quality improvement comes in when we decide that quality level that we currently have isn't good enough anymore, and we want to get better at this quality standard. And then we engage in a period of quality improvement, and that's the sort of things that we're talking about here. So whether it's deconditioning, or whether it's falls, or whether it's whatever it is that you're currently working on, you'll have a certain level of quality that you're working to at the moment, and you will either be satisfied with that level, or you'll want to improve that level. And then you go back through the cycle again as of we're going to plan for some to improve that quality, and then you maintain the quality. So it's a series of steps. You have a certain plateau, you want to improve, then you maintain that plateau, then you improve again. And this for me is where quality improvement comes from, rather than being the perception, which is quality improvement is a driver diagram, or a stakeholder mapping session, or a process map. They are just tools to help you achieve the quality improvement. So thank you for indulging me in my little geeky moment of sharing where some of the background comes from. The reason why I share this particularly is because, as Goldratt talks about here, any improvement we see is a change, but not every change is an improvement. And I'm sure we can all recall change that has been either done to us, or we've seen, that we look at and think that made no difference whatsoever. And I think I've seen that so many times over the years, and we conflate change with improvement, and change is not improvement. So how do we focus on improvement rather than just the change? But one of the things we know from the literature is that around 70% of change efforts won't get anywhere near meeting their objectives. So that's a lot of effort that is put in, and you think about how that is duplicated, replicated across the whole of the NHS. This is actually a global study, so across the whole world, 70% of change efforts don't meet their objectives. So that's a lot of effort that goes into it. But interestingly, it's not just the 70% don't meet their objectives, but we know that 25% only achieve some of their objectives, which leaves only 5% of improvement or change efforts that lead to that in sustainable change and improvement that we set out. So we have to start looking at how we go about improvement and how we go about change. And that essentially is why I wanted to bring this and talk to you about this today, because this is more important. How do we create the right environment? How do we stop essentially wasting our time in all the improvement activities that we try, which end up, that study by McKinsey has been replicated multiple times since the original one, and the same results have come out. And what we found is that through that study and multiple studies afterwards, often the failure is based on the unrealistic expectations. We're going to change the world overnight, rather than a realistic expectation about what we can actually achieve. Lack of buy-in, poor comms, not explained well enough. Are we really clear about what my role is in this? What are we asking of other people? More use of existing skills really came through. So who have we got around us? Who are our allies that we're tapping into? This network of ambassadors is a really great example of this, where this approach wouldn't necessarily have been taken before, where you start to understand who are your friends, colleagues, allies in this change effort that you're putting in. And then time commitment and improvement mechanisms stand out in terms of, are we really realistic about the time commitment for this piece of improvement work? Are we realistic about the potential for change? Pressure in the system often leads us to saying we can do this quicker than we really can do. And then the improvement mechanism really is about how we do things. Is it just a project management approach? Is it just about we've written an action plan, therefore it should be okay? Or is there an improvement approach that we are following? And I love this poem, this not a poem, a little excerpt from Winnie the Pooh. We knew this way back. Those of you who've written Winnie the Pooh, you probably don't even remember this, but it's the first page, chapter 1, in the book by A.A. Milne. He says, "Here comes Edward Bear now, down the stairs behind Christopher Robin. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. Are you sure there must be a better way? If I only could stop bumping for a moment to think about it. And sometimes we're in that bump, we're just in that, we can't, in that moment where we just stop for a moment and think about, but we're in the day job on the hamster wheel, and we just don't give ourselves that chance just to stop for a moment and think, is there a better way of doing this? Because as Einstein talked about, if we want to do things differently, if we want to see the results, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. So nothing changes overnight. This has taken years to get to this point. If we think about patients deconditioning, if we think about the situation we find ourselves, this has taken years to get to this stage, taking years to get the knowledge that we know now that has taken to this. So it's not going to take 5 minutes just to fix the problem. It's something that is going to be long term, and we have to move into that space where, you know, it isn't just about we've got a great idea and all of a sudden something magical just happens and it changes. We have to actively do something. And we may have the best plans in the world, and we may have produced the best plans in the world and had the most amazing ideas, but when it comes to the doing bit, we move from the knowing into the doing. It isn't just this miracle that happens, that it just occurs. And I see too often, particularly with possibly, you know, committee level driven change ideas, it's almost like, yeah, we've done the design and then miraculously we think this improvement is going to happen, but we haven't thought about the nuts and bolts, the practicalities of how simple things need to be introduced to be able to do that. And a lot of that is about how we understand the environment that we work in. And this knowing doing gap is so pronounced, it's ubiquitous right across healthcare. I think there are lots of reasons behind it, and a lot of it is multifactorial. But I see this. We know we know what needs to be done. We're very much in that. We understand the need for change. We've got a really great idea. We understand, but that shift into the doing is very, very, very difficult. And a lot of this was drawn out from that McKinsey study, and I'll come back to this a bit later on in this session. But I think we find ourselves trapped in this knowing doing gap where we can't just make that leap. So as I mentioned, I mean, there's so many quotes out there on the internet. You can go searching for them all over the place. There are so many that just describe the same thing. You know, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If we want to see change, if we want to deliver improvement, we have to start looking about how we do that and maybe think, is there a slightly different way that we can approach that? And hopefully, maybe there are a few things that I can share with you today that may influence that a little bit of that. So one of the first things that I want to sort of encourage you to do is to just take your time. When you're thinking about your improvement, you will have had the idea and you are excited about it and you want to get on about it, get on with it. But it's not always the right environment to do that. And sometimes we find ourselves, we're so busy, we can't even hear the opportunity that's been given us around improvement. We're in the day job, we're on the hamster wheel. We can't find that opportunity just to stop bumping our head for a moment to think, is there a slightly better way of doing this? But if we don't have time now, we're going to waste a hell of a lot of time later on and repeating the same mistakes over and over again. I do look back at really wicked problems that in the NHS that we experience and just think, if we didn't just chuck resources or random ideas out at the time and consistently since then, and spent a bit more time trying to get to the root cause of the problem, we may have solved some of the issues that we have. And I think sometimes we're in that hamster wheel mindset where we just need to fix it, just need to fix it, just need to fix it. And we don't give it the time it deserves. So we do have time, and we have to give ourselves that time to be able to, you know, think of the how we nurture the ground, how we create the opportunity for those ideas to grow. But we're conditioned, we are so conditioned. And there's some work by a guy called David Marquet, brilliant. And I got some references at the end of this session to be able to share with you. And we're so conditioned to be in that, what David Marquet talks about, this red work, this doing mindset. We think we're not allowed. Just giving yourself this 1 hour today. How many of you felt guilty about stepping away from the work that you're doing because it's not proper work. This isn't the doing work we've kidded ourselves into. This is the red work that we've fallen, and it's very much a overhang from the industrial age where we were paid for doing. We weren't paid for thinking. We were paid for doing. That's an industrial age mindset that we still have embedded in us. We've grown up with it. We are influenced by it all the time. We've got to be doing something all the time. But that red work is about doing, complying, performing, all the stuff. And it's almost like proving it all the time. We've got to prove what we're doing is making a difference. Prove it all the time. And we don't give ourselves time, that blue work time, and where we treat this with respect. And treat blue work with as much respect as we do red work, where that's thinking time, reflecting, challenging, collaborating, planning, talking, creating that improvement mindset, valuing that space that we have, breaking free from that thing where, in that industrial age would be the workers were the red workers would be the people that were doing. And only the blue work was given, the privilege of that was given to the bosses, the upstairs people, the senior leaders. They were the ones that were the thinkers. We're in a different environment now. We're a different age. We're all thinkers. We all have knowledge. We're a knowledge-based economy right now. We're not in an industrial age anymore. We all have ideas and we all have thoughts and we're all able to sort of share those. But we don't give ourselves the time or the opportunity to spend in that blue work and treat it with the respect that it deserves. So that pausing for a moment, that spending time, just as Abraham Lincoln talked about, sharpening your axe before you start work. As he says here, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first hours sharpening the axe. We want to get going. We want to get started. We are so enthusiastic. We want to make a start. But if we've got a blunt axe, we're not going to get very far. The example that I often use is Toyota. When Toyota first developed the hybrid engine, the Toyota Yaris, the initial aim there was to launch in 2 years. They were going to go to this motor show, launch the Yaris. Was it the Yaris? No, it wasn't the Yaris. It was the other model. The new hybrid model. They were going to launch this in 2 years. Then the decision was we're going to bring it forward a year, and the engineers had a year to launch this brand new, never been done before hybrid engine. They spent 9 months planning what they were going to do to create this hybrid engine, and then 3 months actually building it. What we often find ourselves in, we launch into it and we start and we try and figure it out as we go. There's a bit of value in that. I get that. We shouldn't all be planning, but we need to give a bit more time. What we find ourselves often is that we go off headlong and we find ourselves heading in the wrong direction. And either we'll do one of two things. We'll either abandon the work because it's gone off in the wrong direction, or we'll persist and refuse to accept that it's going in the wrong direction, and we'll belligerently carry on as if nothing's ever changed, but we'll believe that it's making a difference. And as Stephen Covey with the phrase, he says, begin with the end in mind. So begin your work with the end in mind, but very much start at the beginning. Because he says if your ladder is leaning against the right wall, if you're not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. So before you start your improvement work, make sure your ladder is leaning up against the right wall. And that takes a bit of planning and a bit of understanding. So my next little bit of advice for you is just a bit of a sense of reality, or a bit of a reality check for you as change agents, as people who are involved in change and want to make a difference. It's not easy. It really is not easy. And we kid ourselves that we're going to start here and end here. But you guys work, we all work, you guys more so at the front line. You guys work in complex adaptive systems. You work with two variables that are constantly changing. That's human beings and that's healthcare. So those two variables that you're working with are the most random I've probably come across. Healthcare is constantly changing. Patients constantly changing, the people we work with. Human beings, complex people. You're working with these two variables. Why should it be a smooth path from here to here? Create an action plan. It's gone out of date as soon as we've written it. accepting from the start, accepting the reality, there are going to be some peaks and troughs and some bear pits and some difficulties. And it's how you roll with that, how you learn to acknowledge that there are going to be some successes and some periods of time where you feel a little bit, it's like really hard work. But if you know where you're heading to, as Covey says, begin with the end in mind. If you know you're heading in the right direction, that's the most important thing. And accepting that it's not a smooth trajectory to your endpoint. If your endpoint is to eliminate deconditioning or reduce falls or whatever it is that your endpoint is, a lot of the early phase of this, where we feel like nothing's happening, that is actually progress. It just may not feel like it at times. What we do find is that by investing that time early on, the growth is quicker towards the end rather than a sort of what we perceive to be a smaller, smoother transition up towards that end point. So don't lose heart. Do the investment in the groundwork, the planning, the how do you engage with people, the connecting with people, understanding where people are at, understanding what your ground needs to be able to produce this great improvement opportunity. It's not all about doing. Some of it is about learning and understanding. And then how do we break this, chunk it all down? Again, another one from David Marquet, chunk it small, but do it all. We're not going to change the world overnight. How do we break down what we do into small, manageable parts? And there is a method here which I use all the time, and I've lived by this for so many years now. It's this improvement habit. It's called a kata, but it's an improvement habit that I want you all to try and think about how you get into. And there are these 4 steps. Follow them in this order. 1, be really clear about what you're trying to achieve. What is the center direction? What is it you're trying to achieve here? If you know that, other people understand. If you're not clear about that, nobody else is going to understand where you're heading. We set out at the start of the reconditioning games with a clear sense of reducing deconditioning as a result of reducing patient harm as a result of deconditioning and functional decline. So we're really focused on reducing patient harm as the driver to this, and then backing that up with through deconditioning and functional decline. There are other aims and objectives that we set out. We were never going to change that overnight. So what the second step is, grasp the current condition. Where are we currently at? We just come out of the pandemic. We recognise that staff groups were frankly knackered. How receptive were people going to be to this potentially happy clappy reconditioning games approach? Understand what the current situation is. We got a sense that there was an appetite. There was a degree of appetite. Okay, so what do we do now? The third stage is establish your next target condition. Where do you want to get to next? What's your first stage here? So you say when you chunk it small but do it all, we're really clear about where we're trying to get to. We understand that, but we're not going to get there in one step. So you break it down to what's your next target. Maybe what I've seen really happen really well is where it's just one ward, maybe just starting to do some activity on that one ward. If it's just one patient, we've got one patient up, dressed, moving today, or even up and moving today, or even mobilized to the toilet today. Just if that's your next target condition, fine. Then you've achieved that. Then you go again to your next target condition. And that probably is one of the tools that I would go back to regularly. And I want to talk about which ones work and which ones are useful and which ones are helpful. That's one that I would probably go back to regularly. In addition to, and many of you will be familiar with this one, the model for improvement. As you think about those change efforts, these are where I do bring some of the more purist quality improvement methodologies and tools into this, because I think it's important to understand, to give you something if you're not already familiar with it. And just to stress again where some of the important attributes of this, we talk about PDSA, we talk about PDSAing things. PDSA is not a verb. We can't PDSA something. It's a we try something out, we experiment, we test stuff. That's the activity. PDSA is an acronym, but it's really important to know what we're trying to achieve. What's the overall aim here? What we're trying to accomplish. How do we know that that change and improvement? Go back to the Eli Goldratt. Change improvement is all change and improvement. Well, we don't know unless we measure it. So what are your measures? What are your metrics? And sometimes they just maybe simple things like talking to your patients and getting some feedback. They're telling you that they are experiencing they are feeling better as a result of activity. Often the metrics are not available on a computer system, the readily available data. We have to manually collect that data to start off with. So it may be feedback from staff, we may be whatever it might be, but understand whatever that change you're planning to make, how will you know that it has led to an improvement? And the only way you can do that is by measuring it. Then you come up with all the ideas under the sun, some wacky, some sensible, some really out there. They're all valid because you never know. You may be wacky today. Think about things like every innovation, the Dyson, the hybrid engine, whatever. At one point, they were all wacky ideas. What, you're going to have a vacuum cleaner without a bag in it? What are you talking about? That's never going to work. You know, there's always heretics are always burned to the stake, but you look for those wacky, weird ideas because some of those may come to fruition. And where that does feed in, that model of improvement, that does feed into the experiment phase. So you've got your model of, you know, where you're going, you know what your current state is, next target condition, and you try lots of stuff out. And some of those things will fail. That's absolutely fine. That's okay. Understand why they failed, because it may just be with a little tweak here and there, you could carry on. But if you use something like the starfish model here, I always like to sort of go back to this in the study phase of the plan, do, study, act cycle. Again, we're really good at plan. We're okay at doing. We're not very good at the study bit and the acting on that. In that study bit, think about what has worked really well. What do we need to do more of? What do we need to do less of? What should we keep doing because it's working really well? What have we learned through that experimentation phase that we need to start doing? But also, really importantly, what are the things that we found out that we should stop doing? Because we found out that it's not making the difference that we wanted to do. We can adapt it, change it, but there are some things that we should say, you know what, we should stop doing that. We shouldn't just persist belligerently just because we started something. And you can use something like the ABC, the accelerate, break, create template. I'll share these slides with you so you've got these afterwards. And these are the kind of things you can build into that evolving iterative process of a 30, 60, 90-day review of the improvements that you're involved in. Check in, how's it going? What's happening at 30 days? Are we seeing the results that we're hoping for? What does the measurement tell us? And then again at 60 and 90. Some literature, and there's some variability around this, but some literature says if you do something for 90 days, you develop a habit. So that's how you develop sustainability. If you want to start smoking, smoke for 90 days. If you want to stop smoking for 90 days. Whatever it is that, you know, this is based on some public health data. I wouldn't live or die by it. There's some indication that is valid, but it just gives an indication. Whenever I use this, at least if you've done something for 3 months and you've learned as you've gone, there's a good chance that it will sustain afterwards. So the last bit really in terms of the reality check is more about the reality check for other people. So I've talked about you guys and the things that you can do. What I want to share with you now in this last section is just about other people and what you're probably going to experience with others when you can't be a lone voice. It can't just be about you. You'll just end up like pushing water uphill. It's bloody hard work and you'll give up because you'll lose energy. So the thing is with this is that don't give people instructions, give them intent. Be really clear about what you're trying to achieve. Don't tell people what to do. If you want to engage people, give them a sense of enthusiasm. Give them this is what we're trying to achieve here. What do you think? Don't give people instructions. And this is a public health model, but I use it again, I use it in any kind of change. This is a really good basis to understand where people are at on their change journey. This model suggests, Prochaska, Menkley and Norcross suggest in their literature that everyone has to go through every stage of this one at a time. You can't just jump phases. Any change you've been through or you are planning to go through, or you've experienced, you will have gone through this. You are in that stage, that first stage, where you don't even realize there's a need for change. This could be in your personal life, this could be at work, whatever it is. You don't realize there's even a need. You're in pre-contemplation stage. Then somebody plants a little idea in your head, you're thinking, well, you know what, that's not a bad idea. We start thinking about what that change may be. Then we start preparing for the change. Then we start adopting those new habits, those new ways of working. And then through maintenance of continuing to do that through those 30, 60, 90 days, you develop that habit and you maintain again. And then you go round the circle again when the next change comes around. Now, for some people, they will rapidly move through these, possibly within minutes, hours, others maybe days or weeks, but we all have to go through it. But what we often find is that we're expecting people to go from 1 to 4 without going through the other parts. We've got the great idea. We've been through the cycle. We've had the opportunity to mull these over. And then we go back to our teams and we say, I've got a great idea. We're going to do this. We're going to start on Monday. And for a lot of people, a lot of people on the left-hand side of this bell curve, those innovators, those early adopters, they'll be all over it. They'll be like, yeah, let's go for it. Nick, that's brilliant. I'm all for it. You got the late majority and the laggards towards the end. They're going to be like, whoa, hold on a minute. Monday, we haven't had time to discuss or think about this. So thinking about that, where your people you interact with, where they sit in that circle, will determine how receptive they are to the particular change that you're proposing. And please recognise that you've been through that curve. You may not realise it. You've been through that circle. The people that you're speaking to haven't had the opportunity to do that, and they may be thinking, what are you talking about? I think what we're doing now is great, or I don't see the need for change for whatever reason. And I can see this even with deconditioning, even with all the evidence that is in front of us around patient harm as a result of deconditioning, there is still a body that will say what we're doing now is fine. We can't do that. We don't need to change. What we're doing is fine. And it's how we create that compelling argument that leads people to start to contemplate that reason for change. So back to this bell curve again. I just want to sort of touch on this a bit more. I'll talk about this. We all sit in some place on this curve. This is a normal distribution curve, but this is around the diffusion of innovation and the thinking around innovation. And what it suggests is that 2.5% of any population are in that innovator group. There will just be up for anything. They're the people that will be buying the new iPhone as soon as it comes out, or have to have the new widescreen TV or whatever it is. They're just there. They're just all over it. The early adopters are the ones that, interested, usually they're at the front of the queue, but not as enthusiastic or as crazy as the innovators. There's a significant gap then between those early adopters and the early majority. These are people who are just sitting on the fence, waiting for others to take the first step and just to see what happens. And there's a big gap here. That's why it's called the chasm, because they're just sitting and waiting. Then you move into the late majority, the kind of, the naysayers, possibly, can't, it's too difficult, really busy. Then you've got the laggards, and I'm not comfortable with the term laggards. I like to use the word skeptic. These are your skeptics. These are your people you can go to and say, am I being a bit mad here? Is it just me, or is there not? And they'll be like, but you could think of this, or you could do that. Use your skeptics. Use that 16% of people in your population that will be that but, because one of those buts will stop you making a mistake. That you may see them as negative, you may see them as challenging, and some of the old methodology will be get those on board and everybody else will follow. You'll waste a hell of a lot of time doing that, trying to get that cohort of people on board. The literature and the evidence suggests if you get your innovators and your early adopters will come with you. It doesn't matter what. Your early majority are your key group. Those people who are just looking over the fence, interested in what you're doing. When you've got that, about half of that group on board, you start to develop momentum. Once you've got all of those people on board, you've got the tipping point, and then the late majority and the skeptics come on board later on. But don't ignore those towards the right-hand side. of the curve. They're really important to give you a reality check. I've been guilty as much as anybody else in the world of having a crazy idea and getting really excited about it and getting frustrated about why doesn't everybody else understand or see this the same as me. And again, goes back to some of those early adopters will whiz through this circle really quickly. Those skeptics probably take a bit more time, but they will need to go through every single stage of it. So please bear that in mind, because all our perspectives are very different. We see things one way, somebody else step into somebody else's shoes for a minute and they will see things from a different way. They may be scared, they may be fearful of the change, they may, whatever it is, they may just not understand the evidence at this stage or why you're so passionate about this particular change. And this is where we can learn from failure, and why learning from failure is important, because we can see what has happened in the past. We know from, as I said, the literature, 75% of change efforts fail. We can learn from that particular failure. We can learn from how things have happened before, all the efforts that you've probably been involved in before. You can learn from why those didn't happen. Failure for me is a great opportunity to go again. And as I said, your journey won't be linear, it won't be smooth. There'll be failures, but how do you take those failures and learn again? Go again, learn from that failure. Because this is the point that I was going to make before, but I left it to this point. The biggest barrier to the knowing and doing gap is the fear of failure, making a fool of ourselves. We got it wrong. Somebody's saying, yeah, I told you so. Of course we shouldn't have done that. That's a stupid idea. Balloon tennis, what are you talking about? But the shift between, we know it's probably the right thing to do, the doing it is the fear of failure. But if you take away the fear of failure and accept it and embrace it, and recognizing that what success comes from is a series of stumblings and fallings over and getting back up again. The Japanese proverb is fall down 7 times, get up 8. Just keep getting up and keep getting up. What we do know is that any change requires a leap of faith. Any improvement, the work that you're doing often requires a leap of faith. You can't prove everything. There is a degree of where you are now and where you want to get to, and that gap does just require a sense of, okay, we've got to go and actually do something. I share all this and back it up with a bit of evidence. A lot of this is based on, and as I wrap up now, and please, if you've got any questions, please do shout to me. A lot of this is based on lots of experience about using this particular model. A guy called John Cotter, these 8 steps. Follow this and you won't go wrong. But what we often find ourselves is we leap into the probably step 7 or 8, or maybe 5 or 6. Creating the climate for change, and that's what hopefully I've talked about today, is about create the climate for change, increase a sense of urgency, build your people, know who your people are, who are your allies, those guiding teams. You can't do it on your own, whether it's allies within this group, allies within your own organization. Find that guiding team, get your vision right, understand where you're going, start with the end in mind, and then go on to the actual engagement and enabling the work. Organization could be, when you talk about whole organization, you haven't got to fix the whole organization. An organization could be smaller than a single trust or an ICB or whatever environment you work in. But just remember, this is a long journey. You know, we've got to repair a lot of damage here with deconditioning. A lot of damage has been done through the pandemic and prior to that. But as Confucius says, journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Just take that first step, whatever that might be, and feel free. You know, you may not believe you have the agency that you actually do have. You know, there are things that you can just get on and do and feel free. You haven't always got to ask permission. And as Grace Hopper says here, well used, overused phraseology. Easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to seek permission. Stop asking permission for everything. Just get on and do it. Test it out. Try it out. Somebody says what you're doing, or you can seek forgiveness afterwards. But if we ask for permission for everything, more than likely we get knocked back, because there'll be a level of, or we can't do that because, or we can't do that because. The very last piece of advice, it's about the adaptability piece. This, old piece of advice from a guy that goes back many, many hundred years, but this still remains. It's not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able to best adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds yourself. You will survive, your improvement will survive by being adaptable, by rocking with the rolling as things happen, and it's not going to be perfect. Things will happen, failure will happen. Go with it, create the right environment for change. As I mentioned, a bit of reference, I always like to share what I've been talking about. If you ever want to go and get some books to go and read, love these. The Goal by Eli Goldratt, Leading Change by Sean Cotter, 2 books by David Marquet, Turn the Ship Around and Leadership with Language. Those 2 I think have probably changed my thinking more than most books in the past few years around from a random source. Wouldn't necessarily have thought of myself, but David Marquet was a submarine commander in the US Navy. Doesn't talk about submarining very much, but he talks about leadership, talks about the language of leadership, talks about the how you create that environment. So definitely recommend those. And that really is me. Thank you for listening. Contact details are there on the screen if you ever want to tweet me, or whatever it's called now, but I'm still calling it Twitter. It's still Twitter to me. Tweet, sticks them on Twitter. Email address is there if you got any questions. But happy to take any questions or comments or observations. Challenge. Tell me I'm talking rubbish. It's just my opinion. Please let me know. Over to you, Gina.
Thank you, Nick. I really appreciated the headspace, the reflecting in real time thinking that presentation gave me. So and it's just ideal for what we all want as we start thinking about continuing our reconditioning journey and being champions in that space where potentially there aren't that many of us as we get sucked into the day job and everything else, and just hanging on to that as a community I think is going to be really quite powerful. So I'm hoping that's done the same for others. And I know Rebecca's popped in the chat. Brilliant, Nick. Thank you. Immediately and practically helpful in the long-term slow steps as well. So yeah, absolutely. So opening to the floor, comments or questions. I'm looking for the little yellow hands. Excuse me, I'm in a slightly noisy Jenna house. If you can get background noise.
Can't hear it.
BJ, any thoughts?
While people are thinking, I'll just respond to Rebecca.
I was going to put the hand up. You called me.
Go on, BJ. You go. Go on.
Nick, thanks for all the informations and slides. It's really brilliant. I really appreciate a lot of tools for everyone to take home to work across. Like I worked across some of the change models. One of my question is like, you talk about the PDSA cycle plan, do, study, act. I find out PDSA works very good when someone already got the skills and they got the knowledge to certain level to work on. Sometimes I feel a PTCI work better when someone needs a new skill, plan, train, check, implement. There are hundreds and millions of tools available outside, but selecting that right tool and right time is very important. That's one of the things I felt like most of the organization I find that everyone goes behind PDSA. They don't realize there are other things like.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, BJ. And I think the thing for me is that, as you said, there are, you can pick whatever model you want or tool or whatever you want, and we fetch that off the shelf when we're ready. And if we're not ready, there's no point fetching it off the shelf, whether it's PDSA, PDCA, whatever you want. My comment often around PDSA or any other kind of approach like that is that we do it all the time anyway. It's a clinical model. Within clinical work, we do it all the time. We'll establish a plan, whether that's as a AHP or whether that's as a nurse or a doctor. There's a plan, and then we're going to do something, some kind of treatment, some kind of intervention, and we'll see how they're getting on, see how the patient's getting on. Has the intervention made a difference? And then we'll act on that intervention. So when I see PDSA seen as like some weird newfangled tool over here, it's It's not. It's how we operate all the time. If we, I don't know, if we chose to take a different way to work every day, we would do the same. We'd plan for it, we'd do it, we'd see if it made a difference. We don't have to make it anything special. And I'm a big believer in keep things as simple as possible. I don't like the way that at times it becomes the special preserve of certain people to have QI knowledge or knowledge. It should be available to the masses. It's just a way of working. I like to see improvement as this is just how we do things around here. So we use that. Let's try something out, see how we've got on, respond to that. So you're right. There are so many different ways of doing it. We can get bogged down and obsessed by certain things. I'd always challenge back to say PDSA is just one way. Plan, do, study, act is just one way, but it's what we do in probably 99% of our daily work anyway. We're always trying things out. So agree. Don't get hung up on the tools.
Well, again, it's decided upon the individual who is leading on that, isn't it? If they don't have that wider awareness of what else coming, like
yeah,
that's
but in your
one of the difficult things.
I suppose if you put improvement in the hands of improving people, you're isolating it, you're separating it out. It's like when I've seen too often times now, the infection control nurse is the person that deals with all infection control issues, or the falls nurse. Oh, we've had a fall, let's call the falls nurse. But improvement's the same. It's what we all do. We all improve. We all have the ability. It's just how we describe it. And again, this is how we describe it to other people. How we can translate the knowledge that we have. Thinking about that curve again, pre-contemplative. How do we describe to people there is a way of trying things out? I could say, right, we're going to be using PDSA. I'm going to ask you to go from step 1 to step 4, but we're going to use PDSA without giving people the reasons totally behind that. Gina.
Yeah, no, I agree. Both yourself and VJ have picked up on that. It's going to sound a bit harsh, but that QI snobbery a bit, and I think that can put people off, can't it? And I think when Joe and I reflected on the reconditioning games, what we really loved about it was its accessibility to everybody. It was just that permission to do a bit different and experiment. Actually, that is improvement in itself, because it all comes from the right place. And it's kind of, we were just thinking about how we do that wider spread, really encourage everybody. It's not, I mean, QI courses, don't get me wrong, absolutely, and improvement practitioners, absolutely. But it's alongside that groundswell of wanting to do something, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
and it's how you encourage that as an interesting one, isn't it?
I could totally bore you to death about all the different courses I've done, and over the years, and and the times you think, well, that's the most important thing in the world, but come to realise, as I got older and greyer and a few more wrinkles and whatever, that it's not that important. It's more about how you do it, and bring the right tools in at the right moment. Don't lead with the tool.
Yeah.
So I think it's about, and again, we all have the ability to do that. So what I'm trying to get across today is, for you on the call and anybody who's watching the recording, is that it's in your gift. It's in your hands to do something. It may not feel it may feel scary, and this is the knowing, doing gap leap. Fear of whatever's sitting there, address it, recognize it, whatever it is, understand that this is the reason what's stopping me, and then at least you can start working through that. But the environment that you create is so much more important than the tools that you use.
And that's what I think we're hoping, that this community of practice, as it develops, will really do be that sort of supportive space where we're all in that gap of like, well, how do I know what I want to do and how, so yeah. So any ideas? So thank you. Any other questions from anybody in the room? We've had a couple of people give apologies that they've got to go and things. Any other thoughts? Victoria, you look like you're pensive there. No, all good. Just because you're on my screen. Sorry, that was me picking on you. So, well, thank you ever so much, Nick, from all of us, for the recording, as well as, and I'll let you and Joe work that out for afterwards. We'll share that, because I know she'll be out. I've just popped in the chat